Hello and welcome back to another episode of Before the Basket. I'm your host, Josh Bode. Indiana's 3-game win streak was snapped on Wednesday against Northwestern, but they have the chance to get back in the win column on Saturday against Illinois. Today, I'm joined by Zion Brown of the Hoosier Network and Mason Williams of thehoosier.com. Guys, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having us on today, Josh.
I'm great.
Excited to talk some Indiana basketball?
Let's do it.
As always.
Awesome. And we're just going to get right into the highlights from Evanston on Wednesday. Fans of both Indiana and Northwestern packed Welsh Ryan Arena with second place in the Big Ten standings on the line. The first half was all Wildcats. Chase Audige comes off a screen and finds wide open Boo Buie from behind the arc, and he nails the three. Indiana was down by as many as 21, but stormed back in the second half. Miller Kopp gets the steal, and TJD gets the game-tying layup. But Northwestern would get the final strike. Boo Buie drives into the lane, pulls up, gets the floater to go, and that was the shot that he was getting all game. Jalen Hood-Schifino would get a half-court try that was surprisingly closer than you may think, but Northwestern wins by the score of 64-62. While Indiana battled back in the second half to tie the game, it was not enough for them to win.
To get back down 19 and to be able to get back in and have a shot at the end says a lot about the character of our ball club, but you can't do that on the road. These teams are too good in the Big Ten.
So, guys, after the game, I was trying to figure out myself, is the takeaway positive that they stormed all the way back from that deficit in the first half, negative that they got themselves into that deficit, or is it neutral where if you told me like 64-62 lost to Northwestern, I would have been like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little neutral because obviously the road issues continue to plague this IU team. They got down by 21 in that first half, and it looked awful. But then you think back, we were all at Kansas. You think back 2 months ago, that's not a game they even come close to winning as they did the other night against Northwestern. So the fact that they were able to regroup at halftime, come back with a strong second half, is why I say neutral for the Hoosiers. You obviously want to play better on the road than they did in that game, but at the end of the day, they had a chance to win at the very end, and that's all you could have asked for with that horrid start.
Yeah, I like that point of view. Mason,
I think I agree with that. It's also kind of a thing with the Big Ten this year where you don't want to put too much stock into one game with there's so much parity. Anybody can beat anybody outside of really only a couple of teams in this conference. But like you said, I think it's also neutral because there's a lot of positive and there's a lot of negative. Indiana still struggled to get going on the road, like you mentioned, Zion. The turnovers that Northwestern caused completely threw Indiana off their rhythm. But they were able to battle back in the second half. They found something that worked. They were able to battle through adversity, and they were that close to having a shot at the win. And I think if you go into the halftime down 19, to even look at that and be like, hey, fellas, we're going to be down 2 points at the end of this game, I think they'll take that. So I think it's more neutral than not, but there's definitely a lot on both sides there.
And it seems like nobody's been able to win on the road in the Big Ten. And you see those road issues that Indiana had, the turnovers, like you mentioned. Do you chalk up the offensive struggles to playing a tough team with a great defense like Northwestern on the road? Or is it something that might hurt them further down the season, Mason?
That physicality that Northwestern plays with, I think, also kind of threw Indiana off. So I think there's a little bit of concern with that. But I think with some of the turnover issues they had, I think at this point they're kind of just waiting for Xavier Johnson to get back into that lead guard role. He's a veteran. He's been able to play in those hostile environments on the road. And I look at the postseason where you have to be able to win from away from Assembly Hall, because there's always going to be a neutral. There's always going to be a hostile environment. But I mean, even with Indiana's fans that travel, you still are never going to get the same kind of advantage that you have in Assembly Hall. So I think the concern is there, but not too much. Not too much.
What do you think, Zion?
The reason I think it's concerning is because Northwestern is a team that wants to turn you over and get a lot of steals and deflections. You look at Chase Audige, he might win Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year because of his insane steal rates. So you look at this Wildcats team, going into the game, they're going to double the post, they're going to double a lot, even on ball screens, and they want to try to take the ball away from you. And for Indiana, throughout much of that game, they still cannot control the ball and keep it themselves. So the other team's game plan. There's nothing new about this Northwestern team. They've already played once. And to still have that be the result, to still have so many turnovers, it was 14-3 in the turnover margin, that is concerning to me for this IU team.
Yeah, you mentioned the turnover margin. IU has not been able to force any turnovers so far in the conference season.
No, that's really not what this team does, and the defense has been a little disappointing. It's gotten back to where we expected it to be in the last few weeks, but I think a lot of that is the absence of Xavier Johnson. He's this team's best point of attack perimeter defender, and he got his hands on a lot of balls when he was in the game. And it sounds like he's going to be back in the next week or two, according to Mike Woodson. So I'm interested to see if IU can start to force turnovers once he comes back. But right now, this team's identity is not turning the other team over and getting a bunch of steals.
Yeah, I agree. He's an integral part of what they do on the defensive end. But now let's move to Indiana's opponent on Saturday, the Indiana Fighting Illini. Illinois went on the road to State College, Pennsylvania this week to take on Penn State, who they lost to at home earlier on this season. And just like the first time that they met, Penn State was clicking from long distance. Andrew Funk got the steal, hits Jalen Pickett, who gives it back to Andrew Funk. Long-range bomb, nothing but net for him. Jalen Pickett continued his all-Big Ten caliber season Tuesday night. He drove into the lane for a wide-open layup. He had 41 points and 8 assists. And here's one of those 8 assists. He kicks it out to a wide-open Kanye Clary, who drains the three. Penn State controlled all game and dismissed the Illini 93-81. Were the 93 points and 12 threes allowed concerning for Illinois' defense, or again, do you chalk it up to a bad road matchup against a Penn State team who's been awesome offensively this year? Mason?
I think it's also a little bit of Penn State's offense just being so streaky this year. We saw earlier this year, Indiana travel on the road. They got ran out of the gym purely just on the fact that Indiana couldn't close out Penn State on the outside. They're one of the streakiest teams in the conference, let alone the country. And Pickett had, 41 points, 8 assists.
He's been incredible all year.
He's been incredible all year, like you just said. So I think there's definitely some concern. You have to know what Penn State's going to offer. You know that they're going to shoot the ball a lot. You know that they're going to try and pressure you into a track meet, essentially. But I think also part of that just has to be, that's what Penn State does to teams. They've done it to other teams throughout the year, and that's just kind of what happened, I think.
Zion, lack of preparation or just what Penn State's known for?
Well, to me, when I look at this Illinois team, it's a really good defense. Don't get me wrong, but you look at how they played against Pickett. Once again, 41 points, and what Trace Jackson-Davis did to them last month when we were there in that game. They haven't done a good job of guarding the stars in the conference. They do a nice job with teams that don't necessarily have that same amount of star power and one of those guys that could be an All-American candidate. But against the teams that really have legit All-American level players, this Illinois defense has not been what it's been against every other team. So I'm really intrigued to see how it goes in this game on Saturday, because last game, Illinois did not trap Trace Jackson-Davis. I'd be shocked if they came out with that same strategy again on Saturday, but who knows? I watched back a bit of that Penn State game, and Pickett got to his spots whenever he wanted to. So this Illinois defense, it's good. It's a good team defense, but when it comes to one-on-one, just matching up against some great players, it struggled.
Yeah, and speaking of one-on-one, who's an individual player you've had your eye on for Illinois in the past few weeks, Zion?
For me, it's Matthew Meyer. He did not score in that game between IU and Illinois in January. We found out after the game that he was a little ill during that game, during that day, so that probably played a factor. But since then, he's back to averaging around 15 a game. He shoots about 8 threes a game in this stretch since then, and he's making a good amount of his three-point shots. So Matthew Meyer's a dangerous wing coming over from Baylor, and Indiana doesn't have great wing defenders. They don't really have that much length on the outside that can also move around. So Indiana guarding Matthew Meyer in this game could end up being the key factor.
And Matthew Meyer, college basketball media has thought he's going to break out, have that huge season. It seems like the last 3 years, and this year he's finally starting to take those steps. Mason, is it Matthew Meyer or someone else for you?
I look at the freshman guard, Jaden Epps, and Indiana's, as of lately especially, had trouble with the guard play. We just saw Northwestern's backcourt kind of do whatever they wanted against Indiana's defense. So when I look at a guy like Epps, who's really come into his own this year and been an impact player for Illinois all season long, there's kind of a freshman trio there that have really been impactful for them. But I think Epps is kind of the guy that really stirs that drink when you look at their team, when you look at their youth on that side. Epps is just kind of the scoring threat of those three. So for me, it's Epps that Indiana really has to hone in on, because there's going to be Coleman Hawkins, there's going to be Matthew Meyer, but kind of like Brad Underwood talked about, he didn't want to let anybody else besides Trace Jackson-Davis kill him, even though that's what he did. Indiana can't let a guy like Jaden Epps get his own on Saturday.
Yeah, so we've taken care of both individual teams. Now to the matchup on Saturday. So when the teams met earlier on this year, TJD had one of the best games of his career, and Jordan Geronimo was excellent as well. Mason, do you think it's going to need a similar formula of TJD playing awesome and a role player playing well above his season averages in order to win on Saturday?
Well, we've kind of seen that be the winning formula with a guy like Xavier Johnson out. It's really become kind of almost a two-man show with Jalen Hood-Schifino and Trace Jackson-Davis. So I would expect that to continue, but Race Thompson just had one of the better games of his season at Northwestern with 13 points. I believe he didn't miss a shot from the field. And Geronimo, like you mentioned, had a really nice game against Illinois last time. So I think in that this isn't just for the Illinois game this weekend. I think it's moving forward for the rest of the season. Indiana has to find a third steady contributor for them to go far and to win games against a team like Illinois. Indiana's probably the better team in this matchup, but they still are going to emphasize that they're still going to need a third guy. So I agree. Yes, they're going to need somebody other than just Trace Jackson Davis.
Zion, Mason thinks they need that extra guy. Who do you think that guy can be?
I would look towards Tamar Bates, a guy who has really struggled as of late, and really most of the role players for this Indiana team have struggled in these road games lately. But Tamar Bates, after he had that 17-point performance against Michigan State in January, he's been pretty silent since then. Here's a guy that was 0 for 5 against Northwestern the other night, and none of those shots were threes. He shot 5 two-point attempts, for someone who's shooting over 40% from three. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They have to find a way to get him involved from beyond the arc because we know Tamar Bates may have the prettiest stroke on the team, and you got to get the ball to him in those situations, and he's got to be ready to shoot and make the right play rather than trying to create off the dribble and forcing up some tough two-point attempts.
He's been Mason.
I think also with Bates, part of his issue this year has been his decision making. He's kind of fallen in love with every shot he sees, and sometimes that decision isn't always the one that's in the best interest of Indiana this year. So I'd like to see his decision making improve a little bit this year. But I think if he's able to kind of get comfortable, maybe see a couple shots go down, then like you mentioned, Zion, he can become a guy like that for Indiana.
And a lot of it seems like it's just where he's playing. When he's in Assembly Hall, he seems so much more comfortable. And then on the road, it's just a completely different player. But in the game earlier this year, Indiana and Illinois, Indiana shot over 30% better from the two-point arc than the Fighting Illini. What area of the game do you think, Mason, will be the deciding factor in the game?
I think part of that has to be Trace Jackson Davis just doing whatever he wanted to. And like Zion mentioned earlier, Illinois didn't even try sending a double team against him once. I would imagine they're going to throw multiple different looks at him this week. But I think it kind of comes down to the guard play. It's just been an issue that Indiana's had recently where they can't really get consistent guard play, consistent output out of their backcourt, whether it's a guy like Galloway or a guy like Bates that has to step up for Indiana. I think that there's just an element to Indiana's team where if their backcourt is in harmony, then their front court just thrives off of that. I know they love to play inside out, but you have to be able to get the ball inside in the first place. So with Indiana's guard play, I think that's where this game could be decided.
I like that comparison. Backcourt's in harmony, front court is too. Zion, what do you think?
Yeah, and something that really sticks out to me is how many threes each team is even going to take in this game, because Illinois takes a lot of threes, Indiana does not. At some point, no matter how good or bad you're shooting from beyond the arc, it just becomes a math problem where if a team shoots 7 or 8 more threes than you do, they're going to end up making more, and that still may make a difference even if you have a better percentage than they do. So I want to see how much Indiana even attempts to shoot from beyond the arc, while still, of course, establishing dominance inside with Trace Jackson Davis, Race Thompson, and Malik Renew.
And Indiana shoots such a good percentage from three, but they pass up so many open looks.
Yeah. They sure do. It's frustrating at times to watch, just to see, like you said, someone's open and they're still looking inside, or they're going to take a dribble and end up with a mid-range shot. This team has the capability to shoot well from beyond the arc. Look at Trey Galloway. He's shooting 50% from the three. If I had told you that at the beginning of the year, nobody would have believed me, but he is. Now, he doesn't take a lot, but when he does put them up, they go in at a very high rate. So this whole team maybe needs to look at more three-point shots in this game and going forward this season.
The data shows that Indiana gets the best quality three-point shots by a wide margin across all of college basketball this year. So I agree, Zion. I think that there's almost an unlocked and untapped element of this Indiana offense where even if they just throw up a few more threes, they might not make all of them, but it kind of gives a team on defense the threat where they have to guard that more. I know Miller Kopp loves a pump fake, but if he actually shoots the ball a couple more times, he's a great shooter as well. He's up to nearly 45% this year. Galloway, the three-point aspect is a completely new aspect of his ball game, but it's been so steady for Indiana this year. I think they really have to tap into that if they want to go far this year, and I could see them hopefully doing that this weekend.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, but that will do it for this week's episode of Behind the Basket. The Hoosiers and the Fighting Illini tip off at noon on Saturday on ESPN. It should be another great game between these two teams. Thank you to our production crew of Andrew Briggs, and with that, we'll see you next week.